This is 7.6 reproductive and immune systems. This is it. This is it for the whole unit. Unit 7 is going to be over. After this section, let's talk about it. Reproductive system. Purpose of the reproductive system is to make offspring. Male reproductive and female reproductive systems are really different from one another, but they're very similar as well. And so we're going to talk about primary and secondary sexual characteristics for each one. Let's talk about the male. Primary sexual characteristics for males: production of sperm. Sperm production is not cyclic. We're going to talk about that in just a second, meaning that it's constant. It begins at puberty, and which puberty is just reproductive maturity when the organism reaches that stage, and doesn't stop until the person's death, meaning that that person will continue to produce sperm at a regular rate until they die. Sperm cell contains half of the genetic complement of a human being. Requires an egg, right, for fertilization to make a diploid zygote. We've talked about those things before. And then there's secondary sexual characteristics. These are characteristics that make them physically different than females. And so some of this is hormone production, which we're not going to get into. And so there's facial hair is a great example of this. There's a great beard. Only we can aspire. So then females have these primary and secondary characteristics as well. Primary sexual characteristic for females is egg production. Egg production is cyclic in nature, meaning that it goes through a particular cycle, that an egg's produced, and then there's this whole process that's going on, and the rest of the body prepares for that egg to be fertilized and received, and the offspring to be developed, and then that whole cycle begins again. And so that begins at puberty and then ends later in life. And so it only happens for a certain period during a woman's life. There's not it's not indefinitely, meaning a woman cannot reproduce indefinitely, whereas male can. And then there's the secondary characteristics is this cycle, which is called the menstrual cycle, which is a regular cyclic pattern that is found in humans. Other animals have something else called estrus, which you don't have to know. But basically what the menstrual cycle does is it discards the uterus every 28 days, builds the uterus, prepares it for fertilization. If there's no fertilization, discards the uterus, begins the whole cycle again. That brings us to the immune system. The immune system is there to fight pathogens, foreign invaders in the body, prevents it from further infections. There's two kinds of things going on in the immune system. First is non-specific defenses. These defenses don't defend against a particular threat, but against any threat. It's kind of like walls. It's like it's protecting anything that might want to come in. It's very non-specific. Things like sweat, mucus, stomach acid, these are all non-specific defenses. The inflammatory response, like when you step on something and it gets inflamed, that's an example of a non-specific defense. Fever is an example of a non-specific defense. If you have pathogens in you, like a virus that causes you to get a fever, the body is warming itself up in order to destroy that particular pathogen. So yeah, that's an example of a non-specific defense as well. And so non-specific isn't targeting a specific thing, whereas a specific defense is targeting a specific pathogen. Pathogens, any disease-causing agent. And the specific immune response has two parts. There is the humoral response, which you see there on the left. Humoral has to just do with the fluid. And so what happens in the humoral response, basically you have a white blood cell that is going to communicate with this helper T cell that you see there in the middle. And that helper T cell, this is getting a little too complicated. Basically the thing you need to know, sorry, I went off the deep end a little bit. The humoral response has to do with the production of antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that will attack a very specific pathogen. Only one, right? They're not general. It's like go and get that one thing. They're designed for that one thing. They go find it, they flag it, so that the white blood cells can come around and eat those things. And so that is the purpose behind antibodies. And the immune system remembers. So if you ever come in contact with that thing again, it'll make those antibodies really quickly. And so, yeah. And then there's cell-mediated response, and it's mediated by cells, which means the cells are actually doing the immune response. This is where you have these things called killer T cells. And killer T cells are actually going out and destroying the infected cells in order to keep them from causing any more damage. Killer T cells will also attack things like cancer cells as well that could cause the body harm. And so cell-mediated response, humoral immunity, both of these are part of specific immune response that are targeting a specific pathogen. And there's this idea of acquired immunity. So acquired immunity is just immunity that we acquire, right? This can be a natural thing in that you get sick and then you acquire immunity to that pathogen, or it could be artificial in that you are given a vaccine. The vaccine is going to be immunity as well. This is active, though, because it's meaning that you are actually the one that's building that immunity for yourself, whereas passive immunity has to do with something else has built the immunity for you. Best example of this is like a nursing mother who will give her own immunity to the child that she's nursing. This lasts for like 6 months in a nursing baby. And so that's an example of that. There's other examples of passive immunity as well. But the idea that we acquire immunity actively most of the time, but we can also acquire it passively as well. Allergies, very important part of the immune system. What is an allergy? It's an overactive immune system. Basically, the way you can think of an allergy is like having an inflammatory response against things that aren't dangerous. And so like pollen, pet dander. Pet dander is just a fancy word for like pet skin flakes. And so these things are like floating in the air. You breathe them and your immune system's like, whoa, this might kill us, and just freaks out and causes your like nose and all your breathing stuff to swell up. That's an inflammatory response, right? That histamine that causes that. You've heard of histamine before. I'm sure you've heard of an antihistamine before. Well, histamine is basically telling your other cells, hey, we should probably get serious about this. But you don't need to get serious about pollen. You really don't. And so some of us have an allergy to that pollen, which is just the body overacting. And so things like bee venom or peanut butter and all this, it's basically the same thing. It causes an immune response against something that's not necessarily dangerous. And with some of those things, it can be systemic. And so imagine, like you step on a bee, it swells up and it itches. Imagine that happening to your whole body. And so that's why people have to carry around like an EpiPen or something like that in order to counteract that allergic response. And then lastly is autoimmune diseases. What is an autoimmune disease? Auto, self, right? Immune, so immunity against yourself. This is where the body decides that something about you is wrong and it doesn't like it. A great example of an autoimmune disease is type 1 diabetes. And so type 1 diabetes is where the pancreas, basically the portion of the pancreas stops working. Why? Because the body attacked it and killed it. Why does that happen? Well, there's a lot of research to figure that out. We don't really know. Some of it's genetic, but some of it's not. And there's as many autoimmune diseases as you can possibly imagine. There's hundreds of them. And so it's where the body attacks a portion of itself, basically forming an immune response against its own tissues.